This is an amazing bread to be made for anyone who wants to learn to make sourdough bread, or maybe you have tried to make the sourdough bread before and it didn't work. I promise you this will work. This is a very detailed sourdough bread tutorial. We will start making this bread with adding 500 grams of bread flour into a bowl placed on a scale. I'm using strong white bread flour I buy from little supermarkets. It's quite cheap flour, but I have a very high success rate with it. Next, we will add a teaspoon of salt. I like to mix my salt in the flour. I'm kind of hiding salt in the flour, and because I believe that helps with the bread making. Maybe that is an idea that I brought from baking bread with commercial yeast. I carry on doing that in my sourdough bread baking as well. Next, we will need 300 milliliters of warm water because sourdough loves warm. I mix boiled water with cold filtered water, and that's how I make my warm water. Then I'm gonna add a tablespoon of sugar. You can add any type of sugar you have. I If you have a honey, you can add honey as well. I had the sugar, so I'm just adding the sugar, mixing it, and letting it melt in the water. Next, we're going to move to the most important ingredient in sourdough bread, which is a sourdough starter. I fed a sourdough starter quite a few hours ago, and just to make sure it's working properly, I will put a little bit of a sourdough starter into my water to make sure it flows, and it does. When a sourdough flows, that means it's light enough and is ready for bread making. Then I'm gonna go and add 300 grams of that sourdough starter into the water. So I zero down my scales, and now I'm gonna add 300 grams of my sourdough. So I'm just pouring it in, and look at that beautiful sourdough starter. If you need a recipe how to make sourdough starter, it's on my website and I will leave a link below. I also have a video how to feed sourdough starter if you need any help with that. Yes, I did go a little bit over 300 grams of sourdough starter, but that's not a biggie because it's an extra sourdough starter to make the bread rise more. So what I'm doing now is I'm mixing it all up, water, sugar, and sourdough starter. Once you mix it all up, it looks like a mucky water, but that's okay. The same way, if you mix commercial yeast with the water, it will look pretty much the same. Although I must say sourdough starter looks a little bit lighter. I'm gonna combine all ingredients together. So I'm pouring sourdough starter in the water into the bowl with strong bread flour and salt. I'm mixing it all together. I'm just using a spoon. I don't have a mixer or anything like that. I'm just using a fork or spoon, and I'm just scraping all the flour in the bowl. I don't want to waste any bread flour. I just want to mix as much as I can. The more you mix, the thicker the dough gets and the harder it gets to mix. So at some point I will give up, but try not to have that visible flour in the dough because that just means it's not being mixed very well. So you kind of want to have that one color dough as much as you can. We will be doing stretch and fold, which will help to kind of combine and carry on giving that strength to the dough. This is a very high hydration uh, bread. I believe it's over 100 percent hydration dough. That means it's very sticky. But it's very pleasant to eat bread with a high hydration. I've done with the lower hydration breads, and I must say I much prefer a high hydration bread. So what I'm doing here is I'm stretching and folding. As you can see, it's pretty hard. It's very sticky. The bread kind of breaks when I start stretching it. You could tell it's not very strong dough, and it's perfectly fine. This will need a little bit of time. So while I'm scraping pieces of dough off my fingers, it's a good idea to have a bowl of water so you could stick your fingers in it and carry on working on a dough. So I'm doing just a little bit of more work, stretch and fold, and I'm giving up now. And I'm going to put this in a bowl to rest for half an hour. While the dough is resting, it's relaxing and gluten gets stronger. There's so much terminology, terms, different processes in sourdough. It takes a while to learn to make sourdough, but all you need to know is follow these instructions and you'll be perfectly fine. So my dough is sitting now in a bowl. As you can see, it looks pretty even color everywhere. There's not much flour left around it. Pretty well combined by now. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna cover this dough with muslin. Actually, that's my baby muslin square that I have left for my baby, but I love using it muslin everywhere, anywhere I can in my life, in my home. So I'm just gonna cover that up, leave it on the side, and I'll come back to this dough in about half an hour. Half an hour has gone. And now I'm gonna do a second stretch and fold on this dough. It feels already more elastic and it's becoming easier to work on the dough, but it is a high hydration dough, as I mentioned earlier. So I will use my dough scraper, and it's such a good tool to have. Um, so I'm gonna use that to help me to scrape the dough out of the bowl. So now I'm gonna start doing my second stretch and fold. This time I've got a little bowl of water where I'm gonna dip my fingers to help me to work with this dough. I've got my dough scraper, which actually really good in helping you to stretch the dough as well. So what I'm doing is I'm stretching sourdough in all sides and just kind of making a big square. That's a really good stretch. So I stretch as much as I could, and now I'm gonna fold it on the top of each other, all sorts of sides. So when I'm folding, I'm also forming a kind of a dough ball. It's not easy to do, and the more you work with the dough, the stickier it gets again. So it looks like I'm doing a really good job forming that sourdough ball, but now it's becoming sticky again and the dough is starting to break as I'm stretching. You don't have to do too many stretches when you do stretch and fold, especially at such an early stage. But what you can do is just try to see how much you can do, how much the dough allows you to do. I find easier if I dip my fingers in the water and start stretching again. It kind of helps to make that dough elastic again. There isn't much more I can do with this dough at this stage. So now I'm gonna put the dough back in a bowl and let it rest for another half an hour. I get it covered again with the muslin cloth and put aside on my worktop to rest until the next stretch. Half an hour later, I'm starting my third stretch and fold. As you can see, the dough is becoming uh, bigger. The volume has grown. And now I'm gonna scrape it out. As you can see, when I'm taking the dough out, it kind of comes out a whole lot. That means it's becoming more and more elastic. So now I'm gonna dip my fingers in the water and start stretching and folding again. I find that third time the dough is even more stretchier, and the scraper is actually very good at helping you to stretch it out because you can lift it up, lift it as high as you can, and just kind of fold it over on the top of the rest of the dough. Again, I'm trying to do as much folding as I can. I stretch, I fold, and keep repeating that as much as I can. Stretching and folding helps the gluten to develop. Sounds very technical, and I won't bore you with details. All you need to know, the more stretch and folds you make, the easier it is to continue working with the dough, and it helps to develop those nice bubbles and the strength in the dough, which is better for the final bread. I love just working with my wrist, pulling it out away and folding over. I guess I've seen this being done more in a traditional bread making with a commercial yeast, but I tend to do that with the sourdough as well. It doesn't matter how you fold and stretch as long as you do it. There's no perfect technique. Um, and as you continue making your own bread, you might find that certain things was works better than others. I enjoy doing stretch and fold. I find that actually very relaxing. Let us know in the comments below if you ever done stretch and folds, and if you have, do you enjoy doing this? And if you have done it and maybe you're struggling, so share with us, what are your struggles? It looks like I won't be able to do any more stretch and fold because the dough is becoming too sticky again. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put it back in a bowl. Doesn't want to come off my dough scraper. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let it sit and rest for another half an hour before I come back to fourth and final stretch and fold. Right, this is my last stretch and folds. Let's have a look at the dough. It looks slightly bigger than we've had last time, so obviously it has increased the volume. As you can see, it becomes more and more elastic every time I'm trying to take that dough out. Look at that stretch. That's a good dough. This dough is ready to be made into a bread. But before I do anything else, I'm gonna get that dough out of the bowl. I actually enjoy this folding quite a lot. Um, and I'm gonna get that dough out of the bowl, and I'm gonna do one last stretch and fold before I actually gonna take the next step of preparing my bread for the very final baking. After this final stretch and fold, I'm gonna put the dough back into the bowl, but only for a couple of minutes while I'm preparing the baking tin for the breads. So I'm just gonna leave it on the side for a couple of minutes, and I come back to it in a short while. So I got some baking paper. I usually make that wet under the tap water, and it helps me to like a wrinkle, and then it becomes more manageable, and I find that it sticks easier to the bottom of the tin. So what I'm doing is I'm placing that baking sheet into a baking tin. This is just a standard um, bread baking tin that I've got from local supermarket, nothing fancy. It was only a couple of pounds. So now I'm getting my dough out of the bowl. Okay, I can't resist. I'm gonna do a little bit more folding and stretching. Um, I think I'm just enjoying this process too much. So any excuse to do some stretch and fold, I'll just go for it. As you can see, I'm working really hard to shape the sticky dough into a ball. And what I'm gonna do is now I'm gonna place the dough into the baking tin. It's so sticky. It's just anything you know about placing dough, securing all ends. This is way too sticky for that. I'm gonna place a glass dish with the sourdough into a fridge and leave it there for 12 hours. After 12 hours, I remove the glass dish with the sourdough out from the fridge. The dough has actually doubled, so that's really good. In the fridge happens a lot of slow fermentation, which is great for the bread and is better for our gut health as well. So before I start scoring, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sprinkle some flour on the top of the sourdough. It does have a beautiful decorating effect, but more so is to help you to score the bread um, more easier. Scoring yet is not my strength, but what I've learned so far is to cut the sourdough 45-degree angle. And I must say, cutting it 45-degree angle is much easier than cutting it 90-degree angle. I'm trying to go a little bit deeper with the cuts, but it seems to be not that easy. Again, this is a skill in the sourdough making that I need to still perfect. There are some amazing uh people with amazing scoring skills, and I'm not one of them just yet. So my pretty basic scoring sourdough bread is done, and now we're gonna prepare our oven for baking. So I've got this kind of a bottom tray in the oven, which I fill with cold water, and that will create a steam. Now I've been preheating my oven, and now I'm gonna be placing my sourdough bread inside the oven. After 15 minutes of baking, my sourdough bread is done. Look at that beautifully cuts that opened up. Look at that flower sitting on the top so beautifully. Is so gorgeous. That golden, rusty look on the top. I cannot stop looking at this beautiful bread loaf. One of the best tips I can give you in regards to bread making is to never cut a hot bread loaf. Let your bread loaf to properly cool down. Leave it for a couple of hours. With sourdough, it seems like it needs even more time to cool down. If you make the bread in the afternoon or evening, just let it cool down through the night and start cutting it the next morning. I just want to show you a little bit more of this beautifully done sourdough bread loaf. Okay, so my bread loaf has been cooling down for, I would say, good 4 hours plus. And now I'm ready to cut. It has that very soft bread loaf and the crust. And now I'm gonna cut it. I do need to invest in a better bread knife, and this is on my shopping list. I'm cutting my best. I know it's not perfect, but I'm really curious to see how the bread gonna look inside. The bread has beautiful, typical, classic sourdough bubbles. It's very soft and very moist. Absolutely delicious bread.